when I first started thinking about open science, which has only been very recently, because I'm very early career, I just stress that. In theory, I was kind of coming at it from this point of view. So in my mind, I went to a reproducibility kind of boot camp a few years ago, and I was sort of sitting there listening to all these talks about reproducibility and replicability and open data and all this stuff, and thought, in my mind, we're talking about like feminist psychology. Like if we're interested in rethinking knowledge and rethinking how we do science and rethinking how we research, like that is challenging taken for granted norms, particularly when you're trying to open up access. I was like open scientists, guys, I think you're feminist psychologists. So kind of came into this from this point of view. And then the more that I've done a bit more thinking and a bit more talking and a bit more writing, I think that it's slightly more complex than that. So I'll kind of cover some of that thinking. So since kind of open science has really taken off, and I should say that some people say open scholarship, open research. I'm saying open science because that's used what's most in the literature, but I also get that it's beyond kind of STEM. So think of open science as having like an asterisk, and also open scholarship, open research. That these were some of the kind of feminist questions that people were having about open science. So there was a special issue in the journal Psychology of Women Quarterly that was all about open science and feminist research. And it's amazing, it's all published now. And I contributed 2 pieces to it. And these were the kinds of questions that people were asking about open science. So within this conversation about open science, who is being included in the conversation? Like whose voices are we hearing? Kind of by definition, whose voices is missing? Who is holding the power? So who decides, for example, what robust science looks like, what good science looks like, what science looks like? What structures are governing this? And yeah, who defines what kind of robust, good, rigorous, important science is? And I also really like, so Elizabeth Bennett wrote a piece for that special issue, and I love the question that she asked, which is, what does open science mean for research methodologies that have historically been a home for transgressive and radical question asking? And I think that this is the kind of question that I have since been thinking quite a bit about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the beginning of about early career researchers, and particularly early career feminist researchers navigating the space, because it's kind of what chimes most with my experiences. And it also is a kind of brief summary of a paper that I wrote for that special issue about feminist early career researchers. So I won't talk too much about ECRs because I think that there's kind of wider issues. But from an early career perspective, I find it fascinating how early career researchers kind of muddling through and navigating and in some ways kind of advocating for and leading this open science conversation. So what's really interesting to me is that open science, a lot of kind of open science conversations and tools and initiatives have been like really championed and embraced by people right at the start of their research career, which I think is really interesting. So there's a bit of evidence. So Chris Chambers reported that around 80% of people who are publishing registered reports are PhD students or early career researchers. There's been a load in the literature around kind of community source, like reading lists and how-to guides and events like this, and like newsletters and conferences and all of this stuff of people who are like really beginning their journey in open science. So I think it's interesting how a lot of the open science conversation really feels like a kind of grassroots, bottom-up, this is our vision for science. However, it's also interesting to consider what that means in the context of the fact that early career researchers, by definition, are kind of have issues of like powerlessness, precarity, so in terms of like job stability and things like that, and also as we kind of try and navigate academia and all of its politics. So what myself and some colleagues of the reference, does this have a thing? Yeah, look, woo, the references at the bottom. What we kind of came together to start writing about is how do we make sure that if open science is being championed by early career researchers, how can we make sure that all early career researchers get a seat at this open science table? And then as we were writing this paper, we kind of thought a bit more around well, is this a table that we want a seat at? And whose table is it anyway? So who is kind of governing these spaces and who is restricting access? We also thought about this, so this is the paper. We also kind of thought about it in terms of if you are an early career researcher who has those issues of precarity and power, that if you are coming from a research epistemology or a research point of view that is inherently marginalised anyway, so there's all kinds of evidence which shows how feminist research or research around feminist topics is typically viewed as less rigorous, less scientific, less important, overly political, overly sensitive, those kind of things. So how do you kind of navigate these conversations around research robustness when you are coming from not only a kind of early career point of view, which means that you are kind of bottom of the food chain, if you like, but you're also coming from or you're doing research that kind of faces trying to advocate for itself as like a legitimate research question. So what I thought we'd do, so I've given this talk a few times where I've talked about early career researchers and how we navigate it, and I draw a lot from my own experiences. And a few people have been like, okay, Maddie, cool, but like, where's the data? Where's the data? Where's the evidence? So a few of us, which I mean, there's a different talk about why that's necessary. Anyway, so a few of us got together, and this paper is in prep. It'll be public, we'll be pre-printing like soon, next month. And we basically surveyed a load of PhD students in psychology in the UK and asked them all kinds of questions about their experience of open science, how they kind of feel about open science, all of this sort of stuff. And it wasn't just feminist research, it was just anyone who's doing a psychology PhD. So how do they do it? Do they feel like they can actually participate? What do they need? All of this kind of stuff. And I was kind of expecting that it would be a kind of interesting, like, oh, look, people are positive about open science. But some of the qualitative data was, it shocked me. And I think it speaks quite nicely to some of the issues that I'm talking about. So I won't read this whole thing out because that would be really boring for you. But this is what one person was saying in the survey. So we asked them, oh, is open science, are you interested in it? Is it something that you care about? And there was kind of this, we just did a content analysis. We've not yet done, we haven't done anything kind of richer than that. But quite a few people in this sample were talking about, like, I kind of get open science, like I get the moral case for it, but currently it is not yet practiced with things like kindness. A few people talk about compassion. There are people online who are horrible to researchers. And there was this, really throughout the data, there were all kinds of people who were talking about how open science spaces have kind of been derailed with this hostility and abrasiveness, which creates a real barrier for engagement. And I think that considering if you're then coming from a feminist point of view, and you know that feminist research is typically viewed as less scientific, and there's been all kinds of cases, particularly on academic Twitter recently, around research that comes from feminist epistemology being kind of heavily scrutinised and criticised, then I think that these kind of issues should be taken really seriously by open science. And I also think that there's this, can you read that?